drawings of families and taking joy in each other that no amount of social media can convey. So again, we must honor their service with our full support and protection and gratitude for what they mean in our lives. Today, the Postal Service, and this is why this is so important that we have this legislation, the Postal Service provides critical services for Americans in every corner of the country, from our workers delivering paychecks and tax returns, for our seniors ensuring Social Security benefits, for small businesses providing shipping and essential services, for millions of Americans, particularly rural Americans, delivering 1.2 billion prescriptions, including most of the medications delivered by the VA. In 2019, 1.2 billion prescriptions were delivered by the Postal Service. And that was before the coronavirus hit. And for voters, delivering absentee ballots and election mail, which is essential, especially during the coronavirus epidemic. No one should be forced to choose between his or her health and the right to vote. Across the nation, though, the Postmaster General is pushing sweeping new operational changes that degrade service, delay the mail, and threaten to disenfranchise voters, particularly in communities of color. Now the postmaster says he will postpone any further changes until after the election. That's what he says. But this is about more than the election. This legislation is written in a timely fashion to be about the coronavirus, and these changes to be there beyond until the end of January or the end of the raging epidemic, whichever is later. It is in that regard that I rise as Speaker to support the legislation. But as a representative of my district, where I'm not called Madam Speaker, I'm called Nancy, this is what they have told me. Nancy, Michael has said, he's a veteran with epilepsy. He reports that prescriptions sent by the VA through the mail are taking twice as long to arrive. Walker says he is a senior with debilitating health conditions, is now struggling to send and receive his mail after his closest mailbox was suddenly removed. Claire, an 83-year-old with serious chronic illness who does not have a car and is afraid to use public transport during the pandemic, is in a panic because I'm utterly dependent on USPS for my medication and other vital deliveries, and of course, my ballot. Another San Francisco, Charlotte, warns that the Postal Service is vital to our country, not only when it comes to mail and voting, but also for fundamental needs of Americans. And Mark, another constituent, puts it, not only does what Trump is doing put the integrity of the November elections at risk, people are suffering every day, and they are not receiving their critical medications. That's what I'm hearing from my constituents, and they're told to go to the post office. Well, they really can't. In some cases, it endangers them to go to the drugstore instead of getting it through the mail. Go to the drugstore. So again, this is immediate in their lives. We are their representatives. That is our job title and our job description. And representing my constituents, I wanted to convey some samples of concern that we have heard. Earlier this week, in response to the activism of the American people, people have risen up. I've never seen anything quite like it. And House Democrats, the Postmaster General, announced changes were wholly insufficient and do not reverse damages already wreaked. He said to me, frankly, and I have to give him credit for his honesty, he said, I have no intention of replacing the sorting machines that were removed from the Postal Service offices. I have no intention of replacing the blue mailboxes that have been ripped from our neighborhoods. And he had no plans for ensuring adequate overtime, which is critical in the timely delivery of the mail. He said he had no intention of treating ballots as first-class mail. Now, yesterday he said something different, but that's what he told me a couple of days ago. And I said to him, we will have the provision in the bill that requires you treat ballots as first-class mail. He said, well, if it's in the bill, then I will have to do it. Hence his change of attitude. He has not adequately addressed America's concerns about the slowdown and the delivery of medicine to veterans. He just didn't even seem to know about it. Really? Today, Chairwoman Maloney released new internal post office documents that expose the severity of the service declines and delivery delays caused by the Postmaster General's drastic changes. These documents make clear that the Postmaster General has deliberately misled Congress and the American people about the extent of the damage, brushing them off as a dip in service and unintended consequences. These revelations show that we cannot have confidence that the Postmaster General is prioritizing postal service or the millions who rely on it. Now, the House is moving forward with a hopefully bipartisan vote, and I think it will be, on Delivering for America Act, which will reverse the Trump damage and provide $25 billion to the United States Postal Service. Sadly, the administration has already threatened to veto this legislation, which contains the same amount of funding, the $25 billion that was recommended by the United States Postal Service Board of Governors. They are bipartisan. They are 100% appointed by Donald Trump, and they unanimously recommended the $25 billion that is contained in this bill. So for the sake of every senior who's delayed in getting his or her Social Security check, every veteran who is delayed in getting his or her medication, every working family who's delayed in getting their paycheck, and every voter now facing the prospect of choosing between their vote and their health, we need to pass this bill. With that, I urge a strong bipartisan vote for H.R. 8015, the Delivery for America Act. Let's pass this under leadership of the distinguished Chairwoman Maloney for the people. I yield back. Thank
the
you.
Gentlewoman yields. All time for debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1092, the previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to maintain prompt and reliable postal services during the COVID-19 health emergency and for other purposes.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion to recommit at the desk.
Is the gentleman opposed to the bill?
Mr. Speaker, I am opposed to the bill in its current form.
The gentleman qualifies. The clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Comer of Kentucky moves to recommit the bill H.R. 8015 to the Committee on Appropriations with instructions to report the same back to the House forthwith with the following amendment. Add after Section 2C the following. D. Penalties for Postal Service employee federal election tampering. 1. In general, an employee of the United States.
It's to dispense with the reading.
Is there objection? Hearing none. Objection is heard. An objection is heard. Hearing none. The reading is dismissed. Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle have shown immense passion today for both their constituents and the integrity of this upcoming national election. There's no doubt that voting by mail will be more relied upon than it has been in previous elections. The Postal Service will be a crucial link in the chain of custody between voters and state or local election boards. For the Americans who choose to cast their vote via mail, they need to be sure that their ballot, their voice, will be safe. We therefore need the proper measures in place to ensure that integrity is maintained. In addition, if we are going to give the Postal Service funding, I think my colleagues on both sides of the aisle need assurances that it will be spent where Americans need it most. The prioritization of medical deliveries and ballots for this election. My motion contains reasonable additions to H.R. 8015 that ensure that this funding gets to where it needs to go. These provisions ensure that funds must only be spent on operating expenses to keep our postal workers paid and to keep them safe with personal protective equipment. These provisions will also ensure that a portion of these funds go to prioritizing pharmaceutical deliveries to get life-saving medicines to Americans quicker. Lastly, these provisions ensure that these funds are used to prioritize ballots as well as establish penalties for postal employees who tamper or interfere with election mail. For instance, any postal employee will face penalties if they knowingly and willfully slow down the processing of mail or uses their official authority to interfere with the election of a federal candidate. This upcoming election will put millions, possibly hundreds of millions of votes in the literal hands of Postal Service workers, who we must trust to deliver ballots safely and on time. The election will put our collective faith in our Postal Service like we've never seen before. And those who break the trust of Americans need to face the consequences. I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this motion to recommit.
Does the gentleman yield?
I yield.
The gentleman yields. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I claim the time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, obviously my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not aware that fraud is a federal, voter fraud is a crime. We have already established and funded the United States Postal Inspection Service. Little do they know, whenever an employee is in a postal facility, there are internal galleys in every facility where you are observed for 24 hours a day by postal inspectors. I am very comfortable, Mr. Speaker, that we will adhere to those laws. We have clerks who have sworn duties to protect elections. But let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, 3 months ago, this House passed the HEROES Act, and I asked my colleagues to open their mail because we sent them a letter that will protect the Postal Service. We sent them a letter saying that we need to send funding to the states and local governments so they will not defund the police department. If you want to know who's defunding the police department, the lack of a movement on the Senate to send the necessary money to cities who must balance their budget. And the only way they can balance their budget is to cut, because they don't have the funding that has been taken away from them because of COVID. So you have the responsibility, Mr. Speaker. The Republicans have on their hands the defunding of our police department. I wanted to be very clear that we have heard repeatedly that the Democrats had manufactured a crisis at the expense of this president, and that the emergency funding is, and I quote, an unnecessary bailout plan. We do not need to help the current president to create a crisis. We have seen every single day statements from the White House about what we're doing and what we shouldn't do and what we should not do with the Postal Service. I want everyone here to know that every postal employee takes an oath that they will adhere to the Constitution, that they will serve and protect, that the majority of the postal workers are veterans who have served the military, who continue their service in the Postal Service. I want it to be very clear that this election that is being held hostage right now by the Postal Service internal decisions to tear it apart, where you have over 600,000 employees reporting to work to want to uphold their oath of office. I want to say today, Mr. Chair, that the Postal Service motto is through the rain, sleet, snow, doom or night, you will not deter these carriers from their mission. And we are standing here today saying no, return to sender this unnecessary MTR, that we as the Democrats and we are putting forth this bill to ensure that we are not in that place where we're going to try to deter the Postal Service from doing their job. I ask my colleagues to wake up, to understand that this is not a Democrat or Republican issue, because the ballots that's going to be moving through the Postal Service, some of them may even go to them. They better protect the Postal Service. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields. Without objection, the previous question is ordered on the motion to recommit. The question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The noes have it. The motion is not agreed to.
I demand a recorded vote of the yeas and nays.
Pursuant to Section 3 of House Resolution 965, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device.
First things first, you're voting with the card in the drawer.
Oh.
Not the